Hello friends, welcome to my channel SushantChessWise. Today we are going to look at the next topic, that is the opening for white Sicilian defense, and we are going to do an introductory chapter lesson to the dragon variation. Let us see what is Sicilian defense. It is one of the most popular openings. Black tries to create asymmetry with the move e5. The reason this opening is very popular is that black is not playing the same way as white does. Like black is not playing e5, he is playing the other pawn and controlling the d4 square. So black wants to control the center from the side, and his main idea involves in opening the c5 for his rook on a8. It comes to c8 very early in many lines. So the development of the queen side will usually happen faster depending on which Sicilian black is choosing. So there are around 9 Sicilians when we play the open Sicilian as white. So today is an introductory lesson. We are going to discuss what is open Sicilian, what is the main line of Sicilian. So now the fight is going on the square d4. Black says, I will take on d4 and I will try to activate my queen side quickly. White says, okay, when I get d4, my knight will be centralized from the d4 square. My pieces will be in the center. So black will spend some pawn moves before developing the pieces, and white will occupy the center with his pieces, which gives him, in most cases, various ways to create kingside attack. So white's most popular move, nf3, d6. Here the move nc6, e6, d6. These are all playable. Of course, nf6 right now allows e5. So hence black plays the move d6, so that after nf6, e5 cannot attack the knight. Pawn can take the pawn. So here white plays the move d4. This is the starting position of the open Sicilian. This is called open Sicilian because as we can see, the center will be opened now. Black wants to take cd4 as I told you. White already threatens dc, dc, queen d8 check. So c into d4, knight into d4. Queen into d4 is an interesting alternative. After nc6, white can play b5. That takes us to totally different kind of positions. Here black usually goes for the move nf6, the most popular move and the main line. If black is not playing nf6, it is said that after any move like nc6 or e6, white plays the move c4, and then after nf6 gets nc3. This position is called Marozzi bind. There was a player, grandmaster named Marozzi. White gets bind on the d5 square. Black's main plan is to get the move d5 after completing development, but because of his nc6 move order, we can say, which is slightly faulty. So black's main breaks, the d5 or a6, b5, both are stopped by this setup. Okay, nf6 immediately foresee nc3. Now the point is that if white protects the pawn in any other way, let's say f3. Okay, right now f3 is a bit premature. White has not developed enough. Many a times black attacks e5, and after the knight moves to b3, black gets d5. So this e5 is only good if black is able to get d5 quickly. Otherwise the f8 bishop would be stuck very badly. And now we see after ed, qd5, or even after nd5, this position is already slightly better for black. Queen d5, nd5, black has better center. Okay, good pieces, open bishops, f3 is misplaced, and black is slightly better. After f6, knight goes to c3. Most natural move, development with support. So today we are going to discuss the Sicilian dragon. Here many Sicilians are possible. g6 is the starting position of the Sicilian dragon. It is said that this pawn structure resembles the tail of the dragon, hence the name Sicilian dragon. Other than that, here there is the move nc6. This is called classical Sicilian. If e6 is played and then a6, it is called Scavenian Sicilian. If a6 followed by e5 is played, then it is called Sicilian Najdorf. So these Sicilians are possible from the d6 move order. So today we are going to look at the move g6, which is the Sicilian dragon. The main plan is to bring the bishop to g7. So after bg7, castle, black wants to bear the bishop on this diagonal. Usually white does long castle. So the bishop will attack in the square d2. Black continues nc6 and breaks the center by the move d5. So this is one of the main and simple plan for black, which is aiming at. This white notices two problems with the move g6. One, in order to develop the bishop, black is spending two moves, g6 and bg7. And secondly, when the bishop comes to g7, he wants to trade this bishop. In the absence of this bishop, he notices after this trade, the square x6 and f6 both will become weak, and the queen will get access to the f6 square, especially when white plays h4, h5 and opens the h5. So if you assume this castled position, we see that the queen will come to the h6 square and white's attacking chances will become very strong over there. So seeing these two problems, prepares for the exchange of the dark squared bishop with the move bishop e3. So the idea is simple. He will go qd to f3, castle, and then bishop h6 followed by h4, h5. Of course, I will elaborate what is the right move order and all. So first track, black wants to trade this knight for the bishop here. So he can consider the move knight g4, which should not be allowed generally, because once the bishop is traded for the knight, then we see that after bg7 castle, even if the queen comes to, say, after opening the h5 to h2 square, see hg, if we get even this position, after the move rook e8, it's not possible to checkmate the black king. After queen h7, king f8, it's very difficult to checkmate. Do note that I have made so many moves for white and black has not done much. Still white is unable to checkmate the black king. Okay, so the absence of the g7 bishop is very important for white's attack. Far more easier to deflect the knight on f6 than the g7 bishop. After b3, this is the first track. If black tries to take the bishop with the knight on g4, then bb5 check. White is using his extra development. Note that white already had 3 developments for one move was his. So of course the combination was bound to happen. Now after d7, queen into g4 and the piece is lost. Note that the d7 bishop is pinned. Similarly, after knight d7 also, the bishop support to the knight is blocked and the queen takes g4. And after the move nc6, white is okay to give up the knight for the bishop because he is going to get some extra material on the other side. So after knight c6, bc6, bishop c6 check, bishop d7, bishop into a8, black can try to snatch the bishop, knight e3, not allowing bd4 to escape the white bishop from the trade with the knight. So fe3, and now after the move queen a8, white will say, well, I don't need to castle long, I will just castle short, get the rook on the open file. Next move go queen d5, trade the queens, it will be double attack, queen d5 attacks f7 and 8. And once the queens are traded, white will win easily with exchange and pawn up position. Okay. So these doubled pawns are somewhat weak, but they cannot be taken by force. White can support with rook f3 or king f2 whenever required. So this position is winning for white. So the move ng4 happens to be a blunder. Let's go to the main move. After the move bishop e3, black goes bg7. Now the king has got place on f8. So white usually does the move f3. Stop the move knight g4 permanently. f3 has two more ideas. One, it protects the pawn on e4 and it helps to prepare the move g4. g4 is going to be one of the main ideas after getting h4, h5, opening the h5. Whenever knight takes on h5, we are going to use the move g4. Today I am going to show you how white's attack works smoothly if black is not playing properly or not paying proper attention to white's threats. Okay, so after f3 castle, queen d2, knight c6, and we are going to cover the move long castle. So this is a vast opening called the Yugoslav attack. there are three versions of Yugoslav attack. We are doing the move 9 long castle in Yugoslav attack. Other two moves are Yugoslav c4 and there is the move g4 also played by Anatoly Karpov in some games. Some positional ideas are there. Basically, black wants to play d5 and white is trying to stop the move d5. So long castle brings control on the d5 square. Same bishop c4 also stops the move d5 and g4 also stops the move d5. So after g4, main idea is if d5 then g5, knight has to move and the pawn on d5 would be lost. Okay. So long castle also brings more attacks on d5. So one of the idea is after d5, knight c6, bc, and then we see that 4 attacks on the d5 square, and what we will see that the supports are only 3. 4 attacks, 3 supports, the pawn can be taken, but this is a very famous gambit. It's called the d5 gambit. Black can give up the d5 pawn and generate play. So we should know how to handle this position. Of course, I will cover this line also. I will cover all the variations so that we are able to play this in tournament games as white. So today we will see what are the ideas that white has based on the move h4, h5. So the main moves here are, one is nd4. Black wants to play nd4, deflect this bishop from the diagonal, okay, c1, h6, and after bd4, do note that after qd4, this knight will move to g4, bishop attacks the queen, and the important e3 bishop will be taken by the knight, and then black's attack will be very strong. See, after qd2, knight e3, queen e3, queen goes to a5, bishop comes to e6, and rook comes to c8, and there will be immense pressure on the c3 square. bd4 is forced, and here black usually goes for the move bishop e6. This happens to be one of the main plans for black. This I will be covering in the next lesson of the Sicilian triangle. Today let me show you what happens if black just plays casually. He develops bd7, rook c8, then this knight comes from e5 to c4. This is one of the black's what we can say standard plans. Knight wants to come from e5 to c4, attack both bishop and queen, and force bishop into c4. When the c8 rook comes to c4, and doubles on the c5. He brings the other rook, queen comes to a5, rook comes to c8. But this plan of bd7 is very slow, and white attacks, we can see that it begins very fast. So white goes for the move h4. Usually the plan is like this: we go h4 first, then bh6, and then h5. Let's see. Black plays rook c8. Now the move bishop h6. Now here black can try to use some tactics based on the move nd4. Okay, and now after bg7, many people try to win the pawn by the move knight f3. But this is a very risky continuation, because after gf3, we want this only. We want the opening of the position, and now white can consider the move e5 de, clearing the d5, and after d go for the move h5 when knight cannot move because of queen into d7, and we'll see that the file will be opened by force. Now see, after h5, if black cannot take knight h5 because of 2d7, then hg followed by qh6 check, and lot of pressure on the d5 as well. So this position will become winning for white. Now that white can consider the direct h5 also, when after knight h5, rook into h5, gh5, queen h5, that queen g5 check, that is also capable of offering very good play, but it's not very clear whether it is winning at this point. So after bishop h6, black usually goes knight a5, knight c4, or knight e5, knight c4. Both the ways are possible. Now white plays h5, and we see that the attack has really become very strong. Do note that knight h5 loses in many ways, but here we just have rook h5, g into h5, and queen g5. We see that all black pieces are on the other side of the board. There is no defense to the mate on g7. Bishop is pinned, and next move qg7 will be made. Black takes bh6 here. White can just take with rook on h6, and he will be piece up. Although bh6, qh6 will also give a winning position. After gh, we can use e5 followed by bd3, creating a waiting attack on h7. So now knight c4, attacking the queen. Bishop takes c4, rook takes c4, and white is getting what he wants. H into g6. Now let me this is an introductory lesson. So I must show you what happens to hg also. After hg, white mates by force after bishop into g7, king into g7, and queen h6 check. When after the move kg8, queen h8 is directly mate. So this is the standard idea. After hg, the queen is going to enter the h6 square. In most cases, after h into g6, f into g6 is false, but so that the king has place on f7. But here after bg7, kg7, queen h6 check. If king goes to g8, then we see that the knight on f6 is the defender. Move e5, and after de5, knight e6, and white wins instantly because bishop into e6 allows rook d8, and if queen moves, then qg7 mates. This idea of attack is very common. If we have this same position with the knight on e5, then we see that knight into h5 is a possibility because knight h5, rook h5, gh5, queen g5, then the e5 knight can enter the g6 square. So same position instead of knight e5, if knight is on e5 and black takes knight h5, then there is a slightly different version. Bishop takes g7. Now if knight takes g7, queen reaches h6, we reach the same position. King g7, g4, attacking the knight. Knight has to move to f6, keeping h7 supported. And now after queen h6 check, kg8, and here the move nd5 very strong. Do note that g5 would have allowed knight to come to h5. Okay, but now after the move nd5, f6 is going to collapse, and soon there will be mate on the h7 or g7 square. Here it is forced to stop the threat. Nf6, ef6, queen h7 mate. So re8 forced, and after re8, it's white to play and win. After the move g5, knight h5 forced, knight goes anywhere else, then queen h7, queen h8 mates. So rook into h5, g into h5, destroying the knight which was guarding f6, and now knight f6 check. If king h8, then queen h7 mate, and after ef6, gf6, the only way to stop the mate on g7 is the move queen into f6. When after queen f6, white wins the game. This is how the white's attack pans out if black is not playing carefully or black is not playing properly. Today we are at the second part of the Sicilian dragon. So we started the series of openings and mainly we are into Sicilian now, which is one of the main replies for black after the move e4. So today we will get into the Yugoslav attack and we will see what is the one of the main setup for black. So after nf3, d6, d4, we enter the open Sicilian. cd4, nd4, nf6, nc3, g6, and we reach the starting position of the Sicilian dragon. Last time we discussed what are the main ideas for black and white both. Today we will go into a specific line and see what black is trying to do after the opening. So white plays the move bishop e3, bg7, f3, castle, md2, nc6, long castle. So black's moves nc6 and short castle are interchangeable. You can either do castle first or nc6 first. We reach the same position more or less. So as we know, white's main plan is to go h4, bh6, h5, open the h5, trade these bishops and penetrate with the queen on h6 and try to deliver mate on the black king. Of course, black will not make things that easy. We saw in the first lesson, if black plays slightly passively also, white's attack becomes very strong and white ends up getting into a winning position. Today we will see the main way for black, that is knight into d4. Okay, And then we will have third lesson later on, which will cover the move d5. Basically, long cassette is intending to cover or control the d5 square. As black knows that white wants to play bh6 and trade this bishop b into g7 and take the queen to h6. Black tries to defuse that plan by playing knight into d4 first. This is another main position. Now bishop has to take on d4 because if queen comes to d4, then knight g4 and the important bishop will be taken. So bishop goes to d4 and now playing bh6 will not be possible very easily. White will have to look for other ways to open the position quickly. And here black goes for the move bishop e6. Very useful move. Bishop aims on the a2 square. Queen wants to now come to a5 and mostly the f rook comes to c8. Black's plan is very clear. Black wants to play queen a5, get the f rook to c8, make an exchange sack on c3 in many cases, and play queen into a2 and generate dangerous play. Especially if we see after the move kb1 here, there can be some combination possibilities after rook c3, queen c3, queen a2 check, kb, kc1 and bh6 check. So that can create very strong attack, and again rook c8 is there. So this is black's plan, and black wants to create a strong attack on the white king. So at this point it's very important to stop the move queen a5, and here white has a very strong prophylactic move. Prophylaxis in chess means when we know that some idea is coming up, we play a preventive move. We think of that move as if it is going to come on the board, and we try to prevent that. So here white has such a move kb1, very strong move. At first it looks like waste of time. King is being moved when we have to attack very fast, but this kb1 move actually gains or forces black to waste 2 tempi. So one move we are ready to waste so that black is having to waste 2 moves. Let's see what is the main idea now. Basically, white is getting his king away from c1. When after queen a5, queen into d2, he doesn't want to come with a check. So basically, he stops the move queen a5. So this is the first opening trap here, serious one. Many people, sometimes good players also fall into this. Queen a5, but this is what I mean to say, any dragon player who has studied Sicilian dragon from books or taken proper training will of course know this trap. Okay, so now what white has got the move md5, very strong, using a discovered attack on the queen, and knight attacks the e7 pawn. Let's look at all the variations and understand. At least one pawn is lost in every line. So now after the move queen into d2, knight e7 check, king h8, rook has to take on d2, and white has to be little careful after the move rook e8, because knight d5 might allow bd5 in some cases, although it can be played, but white should first play bishop f6. Knight is now guarded, so bf6 forced, and then come nd5. We should note that this back rank should not be allowed, of course. So after bd5, ed will allow back rank white after re1. So rook takes d5, and after the most obvious move be5, protecting d6, white can play the good move g3, threatening f4, and soon this bishop will either go to c4 or e2, and the rook will come to h1. Sometimes the bishop comes to h3, stopping rook c8. Okay, so here after the move like rook d8, we can consider bh3 also, going rook d1 and then f4 soon. By the way, bishop I think belongs on this diagonal to f7 or a2 g8 diagonal. Bishop belongs there. So bishop c4 can be played, and then f4 and rh d1. And white is clearly better. He is a pawn up, and with rooks, the opposite colored bishop endgame may not be drawn. White will have very good winning chances. Let's look at other defenses for black. So knight d5, queen d2 is losing the pawn, of course, loses the pawn. So queen has to go back to d8, after which white has a very simple tactic, knight into f6. Of course, if bishop takes f6 now, then bf6, ef6 and queen d6, pawn is lost instantly. Black can set a small trap with the move ef6. Well, we should also note that we don't want the black queen to come to a5 and open both these bishops. So white should play bishop c3, keeping hold of the a5 square, and even here after the trap b6, again taking d6 is problem, but white can do many things here. One is bishop a5, we can stop rook d8. Secondly, we can do queen f4, very simple, creating again double attack, bishop attacks f6, rook attacks d6, and at least one pawn will be lost and white is clearly better. So there are no issues over there. We can see that queen doesn't have a6 and a5 both because of the bishops, and he can't put pressure on the a2 pawn. So technically this position is at higher level, winning for white. Let's look at the main possibility for black, how black should play to reach a decent position from the opening. So after kb1, black has to slow down his plan of going queen a5, and he has to play the queen to c7 first. So black can get the queen to a5 only after the f rook has moved to c8. So the basic idea is after h4, rook of c8, now black is ready to go queen a5, because now what will happen? Whenever queen a5, nd5, queen d2, any 7 check is there, then black has got kf8 attacking the knight. So white has to recover the queen, and the knight on e7 will be lost. So that will be a blunder for white if he plays nd5. White plays the move h5. White is all set and he's trying to attack faster. Now there are two ways. One, black can play the move queen a5, which happens to be the main move. And secondly, he can take knight h5. Knight h5 leads to a losing position for black. It's a very similar idea, but we have to do it in slightly different way. There comes g7. Knight g7 allows qh6, nh5, g4, leading to the same position. So kg7 first, g4, knight f6, queen h6 check, kg8, and here we should go for the move e5 first. Attacking the knight on f6, f6 is the defender. If the knight moves, then queen h7, king f8, queen h8 mates. So d forced. By playing e5, this diagonal is opened. Okay, it's a clearance sacrifice. And now after the move g5, knight h5, rook takes h5, g takes h5, and now the bishop lands to d3. And the position is totally lost because h7 cannot be protected. If we go f5, then queen takes e6 check, king h8, and now slightly stronger is the move bishop f5. If queen f5, then e6 allows the queen c7 queen to defend h7, and now the threat is rook d7 followed by qe7, and if rook comes to d8, then queen f7 exploits this pin, and after rook d1 and d1, we see that there is no way to stop the mate on h7. If black plays the move f6 here, there are many ways of winning this position. One is gf, ef, g1 check. Now after king h8, queen f6 followed by qg7 mate. So king f7 forced, and then comes rook g7. And now we see that the queen can be taken followed by queen f6, which wins the game very easily. So king e8 forced, then rook c7, qc7, and qf6. So bishop is attacked and queen h8 is threatened. Also bb5 check is threatened, and white will win the game very easily. Let's see the main move for black now. After h5, black should not take nh5, and he should go for his own idea, queen a5. And here of course there are many lines. There is h into g6, there is h6, there is a3, chopping rook c3. Right now black has a threat, rook c3, queen c3, queen a2, kc1, and he can use the move bishop h6, exploiting the diagonal. So white can diffuse this bh6 in two ways. One, hg when the rook controls h6, or the move h6. The line I am recommending now is basically slightly positional in nature, and what it will do is the kind of attack that black wants in this position, we will refrain from giving him that, and white gets a very nice endgame over here. So white can go for the move h6, forcing bishop h8. Bishop has to remain on this diagonal, and now white goes for the move a3, first stopping the threat of rook c3, And now after the move rook b8 or b5, mostly they play rook b8, then b5, b4. That is what happens to g4. But the point of h6 is white is looking for a tactic here. B into f6, forcing bishop into f6. And the point of h6 is revealed the move nd5, d2. And now in the variation in f6, because if the pawn is not on h6, if it is like this, then king comes to g7, and after rook d2, king f6, and the king becomes well placed. But here, firstly, we are denying kg7 and forcing black to take ef6, and after the rook d2, white gets a very pleasant endgame, and throughout he will be slightly better. There will be a lot of pressure on d6. One of the plans can be going bb5, bishop a4, bb3. Of course, we will not allow bb3, cb3. So we can go here. Instantly, we can go for the b2 followed by rook hd1, putting pressure on d6. Black can try rook c5, rook h5, which can be stopped by the move g4 if the h1 rook is not there. And white's play is very decent, and we can say that can look for a good game here. White has one of the plan to go b3, kb2, and c4. We have to be careful about this bishop. This bishop should not end up as a bad bishop. So white can look for the moves b2, g4, f4, and eventually getting the bishop to f3. But this bishop will become bad only if we play the move c4. So white will not play the move c4 very easily. He will try to get rook h d1, when black will have to defend things like this. And then even the position with bishop on e2 can be considered. This also gives a nice decent position. Here we can go for the move c4. When the bishop we are thinking it's bad, but c4, b4, kb2, kb3, and white can aim for the move c. There is threatening c5 already. So after rook c6, b3, then kb2, and then eventually we can try to play the move b4. So white has a pleasant bind on the black position. And we can say that the game is slightly better for white from here on. Do note one thing, these openings, of course, this can be played at a very high level also, but when we are new to the game, against any 16, 17, 1800 or 2000 level player, these positions are absolutely okay, and white can feel absolutely safe when playing these positions. Today we are going to look at the next opening topic, that is the Sicilian dragon, and we are at the third part of the Sicilian dragon. Today we are going to cover the d5 gambit. This is going to be the last part of the Sicilian dragon. Let's get to the position. After e4, c5, knight f3, d6, d4, white is heading for the open Sicilian. ed4, nd4, knight f6, knight c3, g6, bishop b3, bg7, f3, castle. nc6 can also be played. It leads to the same position. qd2, nc6, castle, and here we had the main position where we have different options for black. In the last two lessons, we looked at if black just plays bd7, how white continues the attack. And in the second chapter, we saw after knight d4, bd4, b6, there is mutual attacking prospects for both. The move long castle actually aims to stop the move d5, but nevertheless, black can give the d pawn as a gambit over here. After knight into c6, b into c6, ed5, ed5, it is very dangerous for white to grab the pawn on d5. After the move knight d5, qd5, it looks as if it's forced to trade the queens because queen is attacked and the rook is attacked. But black has a very strong move, queen c7, putting pressure on c2. And after the move queen a8, bishop f5, creating discovered attack on the queen, and the bishop and queen both attack c2. It looks as though after queen into f8, king into f8. White is doing well after the move bd3. So materially we see that white is on top of the game. He has got two rooks for the queen, plus he has got pawn over there. But after the move bd3 comes queen e5, and this double attack creates a winning position for black. There are two threats, queen e3 check and qb2 check, and it's impossible to parry both of them, and black is in winning position. So after rook e1, qb2, kd2, bishop c3 check, bishop into e1, white will be in a losing position. So this is the main reason that it's very risky to take the pawn on d5. And the line I am recommending here will be easy to play at all levels. We are going to discuss some in-depth analysis also by top players, but we'll try to keep it as simple as possible. Let's go to the main position. The line I am recommending here, in that what we will do is first we will do it black's pawn structure in the center, and then try to exchange this very important bishop for black. So black's main source of attack is the g7 bishop. So white will try to trade that. After the move ed5 first, because if we take nc6, then pawn comes to c6 and it protects d5. So first after ed5, we'll force black to take knight d5 and then go for the move knight into c6. So what will happen? Black will have to capture with the pawn, and somewhat his pawn structure would be spoiled. So first logic says that this pawn itself is not that weak, we are unable to attack that pawn. And on the top of that, black is getting open file to attack near the white king. But white is allowing this because he is forcing some lines where after the move bd4, this bd4 happens to be a very important idea, where white is forcing black either to trade the bishops or play e5 and block his own bishop. So here the two moves which come to mind, main moves, either knight into c3, in which the bishops might get traded, or the move e5. These two are the main lines over here. Let's discuss the move queen a5, which happens to be an outright blunder. White can just take bishop into g7 first, king takes g7 forced, and now comes the simple knight d5. So what we are doing here is creating a discovered attack on the queen. After cd5, queen is attacked, so it's not possible to take cd5. After the move queen a2, which seems to settle knight on a1, white can either play just knight c3, queen a1, knight b1, or he can first interpolate queen check from d4 and then bring back the knight to c3. So which will give winning position to white. He will be just a piece up. qd2 check, rook d2, cd5, and after the move rook d5, we make out that this position has become losing for black. Black has just lost a pawn for no compensation whatsoever. After the move bishop e6, rook can go to the c5 because black wants to get rook c8. So b6, rook c5, when bishop a2 allows b3 followed by kb2, and the bishop on a2 would be trapped. So we see that the queen a5 move is an outright blunder. Let's look at the main move now, knight c3. Into c3, queen takes c3. Black tries to avoid the exchange of bishops, but in reality it's not possible. Moves are all forced. If bishop into d4, then just rook takes d4, and this is the positional play white is looking at. So once the rook comes to d4, white will go bishop c4 and then h4, h5. So white is able to combine his kingside attack and stop black's attack at the same time. We'll have similar positions in the game as well. So black goes for the move bh6 check first, trying to see if kb1, then he can try to exploit this play. But white uses bishop e3, discover attack, rook attacks the queen, and bishop attacks the bishop. So bishop into bishop forced, queen into e3, and now black has to move his queen. So we are following a very famous game, Garry Kasparov versus Vasily Topalov, and we know that Garry Kasparov was the 13th world champion, one of the strongest players in the history of chess, and a line which is played by him of course attracts lot of analysis. Okay, and we cannot say that the variations are going to be less complicated, but I feel the position has simplified a lot. White's plan is very easy. White goes for the moves bc4, h4, h5, and whenever possible he takes the pawn on e7. So we will take this game little further and see what all analysis is possible. So here the main move is queen b6. Apart from that, queen can go to a5 and put pressure on a2. After queen a5, white plays bishop c4, and this analysis is very important for our opening preparation, because now black will attack the bishop on c4. So bishop goes to b3. The bishop is trying to maintain itself on protecting the king side and also attacking the opponent's king side. And after the move c5, it seems like c4 is a big problem, but rook d5 and black is in serious trouble. We consider both rook c8s now to protect c5. So after the move rook f c8, it's evident that queen takes e7. If black tries to remove the pin with the move qb4, then white gets a forced combination based on the weakness of f7. So he uses a line clearance sacrifice, rook d8 check, forcing rook into d8, qf7 check, king h8 forced, and queen f6 and checkmate. So moving the f rook to c8 was very bad. Black should play the move rook a e8, after which also queen takes e7. Again, white has kept the pin on the 5th rank. He is about to attack the f7 pawn. So the threat is rook d7, putting pressure on the f7 pawn. Rook c7, attacking the queen, and white can maintain his queen on e5 or g5 squares. So he is keeping the pin intact, taking the queen away, and white is about to get his h rook to d1 and complete his development, then trade the pieces from d7 or d8 squares. So this should be a clearly better position for white. Let's look at the main line. Here the main move for black is qb6, bringing the queen to challenge the white queen and bearing down on the b2 pawn. So white has to play very carefully. White plays queen e7. The queen is not only interested in taking the pawn, but white has noted that next move it can retreat to a3 and keep both the pawns a2 and b2 well protected. So after the move bishop e6, white goes queen a3, protects his pawns on a2 and b2, and prepares to play h4 h5. And the position is slightly favorable for him because there is no direct way to increase pressure on the b2 pawn. So in the game which I mentioned before, Kasparov versus Topalov, black went for the move rook f d8, to which white plays bishop a6. Idea is simple, connecting the rooks. So rook d1 allows rook into d1. Nicely white is controlling the c5, e3, dark squares. Bishop on h6 prevents any rook c8 ideas. Of course, he didn't want to block the bishop to d3. He didn't want to block his rook by d3, and bishop e2 was a bit passive. But black played the strong move c5. He wants to do c4 and cut off this bishop. So Kasparov returns the bishop to e2, but soon plays f4 followed by bishop f3. And this plan is unstoppable, after which we see that white has just an extra pawn. c4, f4, rook comes to d4. Black wants to double the rook and put pressure on d1. So rook takes rook, queen takes rook, g3, protecting the f4 pawn. And here black had the idea c3. Of course, Kasparov must have had a lot of opening preparation here, and he managed to get into a clearly better position. But what I am suggesting here, by doing this line, we know all our ideas very well, and more or less reaching this position is very much forced. Of course, I don't think any opponent will reach this exact position. So here the game went with qc3, qc3, bc3, bishop a2, after which white used both his pawns to c4, c5 and the king covered the square c4. Of course, I will try to give this game in the description. Let's go to the other main line. I usually chooses the move e5, which is absolutely in spirit of the dragon variation. He wants to get a complicated play, keep the bishops intact, and most of the pieces are there on the board. White has a very nice setup here. He creates a bind on the central squares. Let's see, bishop c5, attacking the rook on f8. Of course, black sets a very interesting trap. I would say it's a positional sacrifice, not a trap. After the move bishop into f8, black can just take queen f8, and we see that after rook b8, the move e4 will be evident and the bishop will start eyeing the b2 square. And this position is very dangerous because after rook b8, qb4, b2 is weak and white will have to move pawns in front of his king, and the c3 square and b2 and a2. All these three squares will come under fire. Of course, white should not go for such a exchange grabbing idea. White simply sidesteps the idea and plays the strong move knight e4. So as I told you, white is eyeing the bind on the d6 square. He is using the fact that whenever black plays f5, like instant f5, will allow the strong move knight g5, and after bf7, we simply trade on f7 followed by bc4, and at an appropriate moment, white can take the pawn on d5. Black now plays the move rook e8, to which there are several ideas. The setup what white wants, he can keep his king on b1, bishop c4, bishop goes to b3, and when black plays a5, a4, he simply plays a4. So this is one setup which we can look at. And keep the king side composed over here. Later on, invade the position by nd6 or play h4, h5. The game I am showing you here, or the line I am showing you here, white used the same idea but in a slightly different mode. White goes h4 when black has a5. His idea is to go a4 and the bishop may not get placed on b3. So immediately white goes bishop c4. Now what happens? To a4, white can go for the immediate h5 and his attack goes very strong. So white is eyeing for three ideas. One, he can go h5, h into g6, which is a typical dragon plan. Second, the knight is eyeing the d6 square. And thirdly, the knight can go to g5 also in this case, taking on e6 followed by breaking on the d5 square. Do note that after the moves a4, a3, white will not have to worry much. He can just play the move b3 and seal the queen side here, which is actually his king side. And then he can open the position. Already by that time h5 would be there and we would have opened the position. So any position like hg, knight g5, you can see that brings serious pressure into the black position. We can say that already white is having a dream run here. Of course, we have to be very careful about the move e4 when the bishop is getting opened. But we can see that after knight e6 followed by bd4, there will be forced exchange on the diagonal and the h8 square will fall under white's hand. So this is what white is looking at. The game after the moves a5, bishop c4, black played h5 trying to stop white's h5. So white opens the position by g4, h into g4, h5, white is all set now, h into g6 followed by queen h2 or knight g5. These two ideas are there in his mind. Black had the move g5 in his mind. So he's trying to keep the position as much closed as possible. But here white has a forced way to reach the black king. So white went h6, bishop f8, bishop takes f8, rook takes f8. If king goes to f8, then the move h7 can become very dangerous. Also, we can consider the move knight g5. So h7, kg7, knight g5 should give a winning position. Rook f8. Now to h7, the king can hide in front of the pawn. So white went knight g5, king goes to h8, avoiding any threats of h7. Of course, g into f3 is suicidal, rook will come to g1. So king h8, knight into e6, f into e6, and fg4. And we can see that white got all that he wanted. He still has the kingside attack going. Plan is very simple. A g5, g6 and get the rook to g1 and use g7 or h7 check at a right moment. We can see that this knight is still unable to move. After knight f4, we can either trade the queens or go for a very strong idea, queen e3 or queen c3, which will put immense pressure into the black position. White still has the plan g5, g6 in his hand. So we can conclude that this position is clearly better. In the game, black played rook f4. First bishop takes d5 before playing g5. C takes d5 and now g5. White pawns on the king side decide the fate of the game. White has a very simple plan. We will try to attack the e5 pawn, play the pawn to g6 and use g7 or h7 at a right moment. So there are two plans. One going g6, rook g1 and then h7 when g7 will be unstoppable, or going g7, king h8 and using g8 queen check tactic at a right moment when he can penetrate on the g7 square. a4, let's quickly go and complete the game. Rook dg1, a3, b3, queen moves to b6, trying to cover the d4, e3 and f2 squares. Black is trying to penetrate by rook f2 or queen f2. White went g6 and here black played the move queen f2, after which white played queen c3, and queen c3 is a double attack because one is attacking the e5 square and second there is a small combination. So after the move rook f5, white has a very simple move queen c7 which wins on the spot. So there is no need to play the move g7. Rook f7 is not possible now and queen e3 check, just the king goes to b1. Black played the move qd4, after which now we cannot do the move qc7 because of qa1 check. But white had foreseen this g7 check, king forced to go to h7, then g8 queen check, rook takes g8 and now comes the move qc7 with a check. And this time rook f7 is not possible, so king h8 and after rook g8 check, king g8, qg7 and white won the game. So with this we are concluding the d5 gambit, and for the time being we can say that the Sicilian dragon is over. I hope you are enjoying these lessons. Do like, share and subscribe the channel. Thanks for your time.